Hi, and welcome back to the Ketogenic Nutritionist Podcast. I'm your host, Temple Stewart, registered dietitian, and I am so excited about this next guest. Dani Hamilton is a functional nutrition therapy practitioner and restorative wellness practitioner who specializes in blood sugar regulation and digestion. She became interested in blood sugar issues when she learned that insulin resistance was at the root of her PCOS. She was able to reverse her PCOS, cystic acne, PMS, and weight loss resistance by reversing insulin resistance. Her mission is to help others uncover their blood sugar and insulin issues, as well as to help them optimize digestion for low carb diets. Dani promotes a holistic approach to reversing insulin resistance, which goes beyond just changing macros. She is the host of the Unlock the Sugar Shackles podcast and creator of the Blood Sugar Mastery program. And Dani is a dear, dear friend of mine, and I am so excited to share her wealth of knowledge with you guys. She is just so wise and has an incredible podcast that I would encourage all of you to go listen to. Here is my friend and incredibly wise practitioner, Dani Hamilton. Okay, Dani, thank you so much for coming on. This is so exciting. We've been friends for a while. I've been on your podcast. You're coming on mine. I'm just so excited. Thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge about reactive hypoglycemia, blood glucose, the whole 9 yards. It is just such an honor to have you on.
I'm so excited to be here. Also super excited to see you and chat about some of our favorite topics. I know when we were last together in Austin for KetoCon, we were like we can't stop talking. And so I love bringing this conversation. It's like, we should be recording this, So yeah. I'm super excited to actually be recording some of our conversations so people can tune in and get to learn and hear what we like to nerd out on.
all the things. Well, this is a topic that I feel like not a lot of people know about and is really kind of up and coming. And I totally consider you the professional on all things blood glucose. So I'm excited to bring you to the audience. But reactive hypoglycemia, I feel like it's just undershadowed. And all we talk about is insulin resistance. All we talk about is highs and all this other stuff. So can you just kind of bring this into the light, give us kind of a rundown of what reactive hypoglycemia is, and a part of that too, maybe share a little bit of like your story and what has gotten you so passionate about this to begin with.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll definitely start with my story because it was manifesting in me and I had no idea. So I was one of those kids, grew up in the 80s and 90s, low fat everything, processed breakfast foods galore. That was like my favorite thing, like cereals, toaster strudels, Eggo waffles with light syrup. I mean, this is how I grew up. It's amazing I'm still here. Our bodies are really resilient. But I grew up eating all those kinds of foods. And not surprisingly, I was a pretty sickly kid, lots of ear infections and antibiotics and strep throat, got my tonsils out senior year of high school, which was pretty brutal. And then, of course, you remove a part of your immune system and then it starts to go haywire. So I developed allergies, really severe allergies and asthma the next year when I was in college. And then I moved to Miami, Florida, where the season for allergies is all year round. I was allergic to everything, including palm trees. It's like, is this a joke? So no, it was not. I got those, allergy tests on my arms. It felt like someone was rubbing jellyfish and bee stings on me. Like, it was so uncomfortable. I couldn't do the second part of the test that day, because I was like crying and needed Benadryl. I was just so allergic to things. And
Brutal.
So I was on multiple inhalers and 3 different prescriptions for my allergies, Singulair, Zyrtec, you name it. I was on all these things. And I was finally going to get these shots so I didn't have to, I wasn't so allergic because I was still struggling with the medications. So allergy shots sort of like desensitize your immune system to whatever you're allergic to. And so since I was allergic to so many things, I had to get 3 shots at a time. Like, some people would go in and have like 1 shot. Like, I had so many things that couldn't fit all in 1 shot. I had 3. So a year later, I was starting to finally feel a little better, but then all of a sudden I got worse again. I was like, okay, wait, what's happening? Well, obviously I wasn't healing the root cause. So I was just developing more allergies to more things. I had to add 2 more shots. So now I was getting 5 shots. I was going broke on copays. I was working as a speech pathologist at the time. and I was in a nursing home. And so I asked them, I'm like, can I have a nurse at my work give me these shots? Because I was going broke on copays. It was crazy.
Yeah.
So they actually, I mean, they would never do this nowadays, but this was 2009 and they let me do it. And so the nurse taught me how to give the shots to myself, of course. And so I was giving myself 5 shots in the stomach every other day, and this is my early 20s. I had chronic sinus infections. I was a hot mess. I had my gyno on speed dial. I mean, I was having all these issues. And it was like, having antifungals and having antibiotics and then getting the sinus infection and then getting candida. And it was just like, I was like, what is happening? No one could give me an answer. No one could tell me why. And by the grace of the universe, a book landed in my hand called The Paleo Diet Solution by Rob Wolf. And I was like reading this book and my mind was blown. And I just wanted to shout this information from the rooftops like, oh my God, we've been lied to. The food pyramid is bogus. They're trying to make us sick. And so I took out all the processed foods, added in all these healthy whole foods. I finally embraced dietary fat and all these healthy fats. I embraced salt. I got rid of, the lean cuisines that I was eating and the whole wheat bread, trying to be healthy, right? And like magic, my allergies went away, my asthma went away, I never got another sinus infection again. I didn't have to do the shots anymore. I just stopped giving them to myself and stopped being symptomatic. It was like so amazing to watch my body heal. And so I was just so excited about the fact that like food can heal you. Your body is a self-healing machine. We can heal. And it was so amazing. So I was flying high on the paleo train, really excited about it. And I was continuing to eat paleo foods. I was cooking all the time. And I had a really stressful year. So I moved back to New York. It was sort of like the wrong thing. I wasn't listening to my gut on this one. I was just sort of listening to my head. And so I felt really stressed, but I still was eating the same foods. And I started to skip my period. I had always struggled with a little bit of acne. That was way worse. I had always had, some cramps before my period, but I mean, it was terrible now. My PMS was awful. I felt like I had PMDD as well. I had a really severe breast tenderness. I was so bloated before my period. And then I wasn't getting it. And then I was gaining weight. And I'm like, wait a second, pump the brakes. This diet just healed me. So what's going on? Like I knew that stress was a component, like we can't ignore that, but it felt so markedly different from what I was experiencing. And so I looked up online and I had most of the symptoms of polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS.
Yeah.
And so I, was looking, okay, how do you fix PCOS? And people would say, well, it wasn't a matter of fixing it. No one out there was reversing anything, healing anything. It was just managing, which I thought was a little sus. But anyway, they're like, okay, don't have dairy. I'm like, check, I'm doing paleo. Don't have gluten. Check, I'm doing paleo. Don't have refined sugar. Check. I was like, okay, cool. I'm doing all the things. So because I was doing everything right, I thought I just paleoed harder. And because nothing changed. So I was trying to do the Vitex and the this and the saw pomade. Nothing was helping. Nothing made a dent. I went to a doctor because my mom's like, why don't you just get on some, medications, like make it a little easier on yourself. And so I relented and I went to the gynecologist and he was like, you do have PCOS. You have to lose weight. You have to take the pill and there's no cure. I was like, dude, did I just really pay you for that advice? So I was, needless to say, more than ever motivated to fix this on my own. And so unfortunately, like I just kept trying to listen to things and I wasn't making any headway. And it wasn't until I heard Megan Ramos on a podcast say PCOS is the diabetes of the ovaries that I was driving at the time and I almost drove my car off the road. I almost got in an accident because I'm like, what do you mean diabetes of the ovaries? And I thought back, okay, what do I know about diabetes? I was like, well, it has something to do with blood sugar and something to do with amputations. Because remember, I had worked in a nursing home. And so I had seen my patients with diabetes had amputations. That's all I knew. I knew they got the pink sugar packet instead of the white one. That is it. That is like wrap my knowledge of blood sugar in a nutshell. And that was it. That's all I could tell you. So I had to, and I looked back and I was like, okay, blood sugar, blood sugar. I'm like, think about what you learned about it. I was like, well, when I was reading all these books like Practical Paleo, I would skip the chapters on blood sugar because I'm like, that is boring. That is complicated. That's hard to understand. And I don't have diabetes, so I don't have to pay attention. So I was so anti learning about blood sugar and insulin. Like it was so confusing to me and it didn't make sense and it didn't feel relevant to what I had. And meanwhile, it was totally sabotaging my health. And I had learned so much about my health except for this. And I was like, okay, guess it's time to learn. So I started looking back and started looking at, okay, I have to have symptoms of something going on. And what I realized was that there were a lot of things that I used to think of as personality traits that were actually blood sugar issues. So I used to say, I'm a breakfast person. That's why I wake up shaky and need to eat breakfast right away because I'm a breakfast person. That's why I hated fasting blood work because I would get shaky and dizzy. I almost passed out one time in Miami getting blood work. I remember standing on Miami Beach and going like that, like almost falling backwards and passing out. And my blood sugar was 60 at the time.
Oh my
Multiple times when I was getting all this blood work for PCOS, my blood sugar was 60. Not one doctor said anything to me about it. Okay, so don't think your doctor is going to pick this up and be like, hey, we're going to talk about this and we're going to tell you how to fix it. It doesn't happen. Unless you go to an amazing doctor, it most likely it will not happen.
Yeah.
So I hated fasting blood work. I was a breakfast person. I was a foodie, and that's why I was carrying granola bars with me or Lara bars with me when I did paleo. I always had to have food with me because I didn't like to be hungry. Well, hunger felt really terrible in my body because it wasn't hunger. It was a blood sugar crash. I used to find myself, I used to say, I don't have a sweet tooth. All my teeth are sweet. That was my like little saying. Like, no, honey, that's blood sugar dysregulation. That's hypoglycemia. You know, like I used to talk about like I felt like I had the sugar dragon that was calling the shots. You know, I didn't feel in control of what I was eating. I felt very controlled by this sugar dragon living inside me. Like, oh, it like would sniff out like, oh, there's a bowl of Hershey's Kisses over there. Like, I don't even really like Hershey's Kisses, but I would just feel so drawn to them. And like, I could just not have just one.
Yeah.
I used to struggle with closet eating and binge eating, which was like my dirty secret that I never told anybody. I was so ashamed of it. And I was like, oh, that has a blood sugar component. Like, well, that explains a lot because if I think about how my loving mother sent me to school was like I'd have, you know, one packet of instant oatmeal in the morning or one toaster strudel. And then I'd have like a low fat Dannon yogurt for lunch with a granola bar. And then I'd come home and eat my like house and home of like all these cookies and all these things that I wasn't allowed to have. And if like knowing what I know now, first of all, I had like no protein. I had no fat. So I just had these carbs and I had no fuel to go on. And so it was just like, my body was just seeking energy. So it was like, okay, I can, you know, get myself off the hook for that one. I can stop self-blaming and having all this shame around that because it wasn't my fault. Right. And so the other thing I used to find was that I caught myself in the kitchen one time. And I was like, why am I eating right now if I'm going out to eat? Like, it was this thing that like, oh, we're going out to eat. Like, I better eat something. I was like, why do I do this? Like, why do I do this? And it was that, heaven forbid, it took too long to get seated for the food to come, or like, you know, we couldn't decide on a restaurant, whatever it was that I could not tolerate hunger. And so this is really where those first signs, what I learned is that these first signs of hypoglycemia, they start to come in when you are hungry. So if your hunger is accompanied by symptoms other than I feel hungry in my stomach and like that I still feel fine, that's healthy hunger. If hunger can be like put off, let's say it's lunchtime, Temple, and we're talking and it's like what healthy hunger is I can still formulate sentences. I can still talk, you know, in an educated way. I'm not having brain fog. I'm not thinking about food. I'm not irritated that this meeting is running long and cutting into my lunch, or like, oh, I hate my boss. Like, he always has these meetings that run into lunch. Like, that is starting to be that unhealthy hunger. Hunger should be able to be put off. You can go to the gym and be like, oh, I need to run a couple of errands and then I'll go home and eat. That's what healthy hunger feels like. It's not ruining your life. It's not ruling your life. So when you have hunger and it starts to have some of these symptoms paired with it, that's when you start to know. So these main symptoms are generally, a lot of them have to do with the brain, because the brain is that biggest user of energy. And so when the brain is not getting enough energy, then we really start to see these issues come in. So we might feel dizzy, shaky, lightheaded, brain fog, difficulty concentrating, anxiety, irritability, the mood issues start to come in, a sense of impatience.
Yes.
We might snap at our kids or at our spouses or at coworkers or things like that. We may start to get sweaty, have heart palpitations, have headaches, have nausea. And then, of course, you might have the hunger sensations are not like, I could eat. It's like, give me something now. Let's go to the Starbucks drive-through. It's urgent. It's usually cravings. It's not like, oh, hey, let me just go grill up that beautiful grass-fed steak I have sitting in my fridge and make some, local fresh organic broccoli. No. It's like, give me something. You're in the cabinet grabbing something. You're grabbing your kids' school snacks when you're like, I said I wasn't going to have these again. You're pulling into the nearest drive-through. This is what that intense hunger and these urgent blood sugar lows are driving you to do, because your body is perceiving that there is an emergency lack of energy. And so unfortunately, it's like, okay, energy. Where is my body getting energy? Right? We get energy from the food we eat. That makes sense. But our body also stores energy on us, right? So think about, our ancestors when they were cave people. They didn't have drive-throughs to go through. They didn't have Lara bars in their purse. They had the buffalo, and if they didn't catch the buffalo, looks like we're eating body fat for dinner, kind of a thing, So it's like, what happens is we need to think back and say, okay, body fat is stored energy. So our body is intuitive and beautifully designed that we store excess energy as body fat. So if food is scarce, if we don't catch the buffalo, if we have that meeting that's running through work, we should be able to tap into these stored sources of fuel. There's also stored sugar in our liver. That's actually what gets used more during like the meeting example. We have this sugar that's stored in our liver called glycogen. But what happens to most people is that we eat a standard American diet, right? Like, we're brought up and we eat the foods that are there, and we're told to eat small meals throughout the day to keep, quote unquote, our metabolism going. And then there's celebrations, and then I'm just going to have a handful of this. And then, oh, I'm just sitting by the TV. I'm going to have a little bit of snack, and I'm going to sip on my coffee all day, and I'm going to have a smoothie because that's healthy. Like, we are just eating nonstop. We are putting things in our mouth nonstop. Just even like the drinks that we have that are not water, anything else besides water has calories in it. I mean, unless you're doing like the black coffee, but that's still cortisol, you're still dosing yourself with something. It's like this little drip of sugar going all day long. And what starts to happen is that our blood sugar is going up all day long. And then we get the insulin, which is that hormone that tells the body to store energy, store these calories as energy, store them as body fat. And so we're having these high levels of insulin, and that's blocking the body from burning fat and from burning the stored glycogen in the liver. So we have this insulin that's too high, and it's blocking the body from using these things. So what that leaves us dependent on is only the food that we're eating. So now if we eat a breakfast that is, maybe we have one egg and a big bowl of oatmeal. And I mean, this is being generous with some people, but some people not. But like, maybe we have like a big bowl of oatmeal, right? And maybe we have one egg with 6 grams of protein in it, which hint, hint, is not enough. Then we're burning through this because carbohydrates are like the kindling on a fire, right? And fat is like the log on the fire. It burns low and slow. But we were told to not have fat. I still see that fat phobia coming through. I'm not sure if you see, I'm
Oh,
sure you see it too.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
100.
And it's like, unless you're really on this like keto train, we still have this like, oh, the fat's going to make me fat. Like this feels uncomfortable putting all this fat on my plate. So we're like maybe a splash of almond milk or like a couple of shredded almonds. We're like, oh, that has fat in it, right? But it's not a sufficient amount. So we have this big dose of carbohydrates. We burn through that energy really fast. And now our blood sugar is starting to go low. But we just dosed our body with all this insulin. So now we can't use the stored energy that we have all over our body. So as the blood sugar is starting to get low, we're starting to get symptomatic, and the body is saying, hey, you need more energy because I don't have any here. We're
Yep.
out. And it's like, you're not out, but we feel like we're out, right? And so we start to feel the cravings come on. We start to feel like, oh, I'm a little tired. I'm getting weaker. I'm getting the headache. And then what do? We just, oh, I'm having that mid-morning slump. I reach for a coffee. So we have the coffee and maybe it has milk and sugar or who knows what else in it. And then we get that little boost again. And then we start going down. But then it's lunchtime. And then, oh, we have a crash after lunch. And that's when I have my afternoon snack, right? And then maybe another coffee. And so as you can see, we're just sort of like on this blood sugar roller coaster all day. And a lot of people, yes, the spikes are not good because they also lead to these lows. So a blood sugar spike is going to be inflammatory. It's not healthy for our body. We're going to give off a lot of things that are going to, eventually harden our arteries and things like that and just inflame our whole body. But then we also have that other side that people aren't talking about is that some people are just going low. I call this the craving zone. Like this is where we start to have these intense cravings and then we beat ourselves up because we can't stop doing it. But it's because we're on this roller coaster all day. And because most of us, our insulin is so high that it's either pushing our blood sugar down too low, which was my case, or we're just not getting the sugar into the cells where they need to go because the insulin's like the body's not listening to the insulin anymore. And so the cells are like, hey, we have no energy inside. We need something. So you're going to feel tired and hungry and your blood sugar is just going to keep ticking up. And so, yeah, so I'll just pause there, let you jump in. That was a lot.
No, that was wonderful. And I think you made great points. And there's a couple things that I really loved what you said. One, you mentioned it's not your fault, and it absolutely isn't. A lot of people absolutely drag themselves through the mud when they don't realize a lot of the cravings and a lot of what they perceive as lack of discipline is really, truly not their fault, and it's reactions to hormones that are completely out of their control. And so I love that you put that in there because I think there's so much room for grace that we just don't give ourselves when we're dealing with this up and down roller coaster that's just so difficult. So thank you for saying that. I know we've bonded quite a bit over the PCOS and stuff, so thank you for adding that in. But one thing too that I love that you brought up was that you mentioned some of the dangers and kind of causes and what hyperglycemia can lead to, which is like kind of the top of that roller coaster. But can you talk about some of the things too that a lot of people don't realize is there are some dangers with lows too in terms of vascular issues and inflammation? And again, we're not talking about those things either, are we?
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest issue that I see when it comes to having these lows is that it's extremely stressful for the body. And so then we get this whole cascade of stress hormones, this is literally the system that it's built. Like, this is what it's supposed to do. When your blood sugar goes low, the stress system should come in and pump you with stress hormones because what do those do? They create new blood sugar. And so it's the backup mechanism, like, oh, the blood sugar is going too low. You ever wake up in the middle of the night with like a pounding heart? That's usually from a blood sugar crash because the blood sugar goes low. The adrenals are like, OMG, we need to pump you with stress hormones. So it pumps you with epinephrine, which is adrenaline. And so it makes new sugar. So it does the job of getting the sugar back up because it's creating new blood sugar. But It's also a really expensive process for the adrenals. It takes a lot of resources, and by resources, we mean nutrients. So it leaves us really, really nutritionally depleted, and it also jacks up our stress hormones. So a lot of people, when they have this pattern of going low all the time, we're going to start to see a high cortisol pattern all the time because the body's like, her blood sugar keeps going low, like more stress hormones, more stress hormones. So then you're gaining weight and you're like, I can't lose any weight. I have the cortisol belly. Like I can't go to sleep at night. And guess what dysregulated sleep does? It jacks up your blood sugar. It causes you to be more insulin resistant. So we're getting this negative cycle happening. And then what starts to happen, unfortunately, is the other end of this is that we can only go on for so long with this high cortisol because remember, we said it's driven by nutrients. So then we run out of these nutrients that we need to be making all these hormones and to be having these healthy adrenal glands and hormonal balances. And then all of a sudden, the cortisol gives out and then it's low. And then you have low cortisol and then you have low blood sugar again.
Yeah.
So for a period of time, you might sort of be able to maintain, but then we get this negative cascade of having the low cortisol, can't keep the blood sugar up. And then what happens? If you can't keep your blood sugar up, what are you going to be driven to do? Eat more carbs more often. And what does that cause? It causes more insulin resistance and it leads people to having prediabetes and diabetes. So hypoglycemia is that first step on that spectrum of diabetes. It doesn't always lead to diabetes, but it does quite often. And so I shared with you offline, and I'd love to share a quick story about one of my clients. So she came to me. She's in my current blood sugar mastery program. Lovely lady. I love her to pieces. And she told me that she's been dealing with, she's retired now. So we know her age is retirement age. And she said that she's been dealing with reactive hypoglycemia or hypoglycemia since high school. So this has been going on for decades. So for the very first time, she measured her blood sugar and put on a continuous glucose monitor. And what did we expect to see? We expected to see her blood sugar dropping low, right? So dropping it to maybe like the 60s, 70s, like the 50s, the 40s, because she's telling me she's going low all the time, right? So she's still having these symptoms. So if you're watching this, if you're not watching, we're going to describe it for you. But if you're watching, you can see on here that her blood sugar, the lowest it's going is basically 160. That's the low. And it's spiking with these sharp peaks to about 300. So this person is feeling symptoms of hypoglycemia every single day. She's feeling the dizziness, the shakiness, the urgent hunger. Oh my God, I need to eat something. And what she's been doing all this time has been medicating with carbs. She was an eating oatmeal in the morning kind of a person. And she would be spiking her blood sugar, and these intense spikes would cause these crashes. But what happens is that over time, you have the insulin building up and the insulin resistance building up. So now the insulin can't get the sugar out of the blood and into the body. And so the amount of sugar in the blood keeps building up, but we still have this metabolic dysfunction. And keep hanging on with me. Like those words are confusing, but we don't even have to talk about those words. But what's happening is that the insulin is blocking the body from using any or seeing any stored fuel. So it thinks as the blood sugar is coming down, it thinks we're running out of fuel. And it's not, because there's so much fuel around, but it doesn't have access to this fuel. It's the sugar that's in the blood that can't get out of the blood. It's the sugar that's stored in the liver that the body doesn't see. It's the body fat that we don't have access to because there's too much insulin in the blood. So this person has effectively given herself type 2 diabetes by medicating hypoglycemia with carbohydrates.
Wow.
And it was crazy to see that on the CGM. The good news is that in just a couple of days, she was able to get her chart to this. So I'm going to describe it for you. Now her lowest points are about 130. and the highest points were about 160. So that went from like the lowest was 160. Now that's the highest. And then even more, now she's in basically the healthy range. Her blood sugar lows, now the lowest is in the 90s,
It's
and the
awesome.
highest peak is about 150, but most often it's staying below 140. And this has been in a matter of just a couple of weeks. I mean, a couple of weeks, like 4 weeks.
It's
So
amazing.
imagine someone getting their blood sugar this high, it's spiking up to 300s, and now it's not going above 150. I mean, she is like, now this is almost like pre-diabetes. Like, she is almost out of that diabetic
Yeah.
range. Like, unbelievable in
Awesome.
just a couple of weeks.
Well, and
So
even just imagine how much you've just impacted her whole quality of life, right? Imagine and I'm sure she's spoken to you about that, but imagine the quality of her moods, the quality of like not feeling controlled by those constant cravings, that constant need to keep something alongside of you at all times. It's just so freeing when you don't have to hear that constant food noise in the back of your head. Eat, eat, eat. It is just, if you've been through it, you know what I'm talking about. If you're living in it, you also know what I'm talking about. When you feel so controlled by food, when you get your sugars to looking like what Dani just described on the screen, it's like chains are broken off, truly.
yeah, and it really is like those chains being broken off. You're right. That's a really good way to say it. Like, unlock the sugar shackles. That's the name of my podcast.
Yeah.
Like, it's those sugar shackles are getting unlocked for sure.
Yeah.
She's starting to lose weight. She's like,
Awesome.
she's feeling so much better. She's sleeping better. And she said she feels less inflamed. But one of the biggest things is that she's not fearing her hunger anymore. And this is coming back to that place of, what starts to happen as we heal our body is that we're able to trust that, like, hunger does not mean danger.
Yes.
Hunger is, my body's hungry. That's normal. It's okay, cool. My body's hungry. I can listen to that. But also, I don't always need to listen to that, because at the beginning, our hunger cues, like, we're used to eating when we're used to eating. So
Yeah.
if you're eating 6 times a day, all those times of day, your body is going to be hungry. And
Yes.
a lot of us know this from fasting. So we've done some sort of like extended fasting, and it's like, oh, it's lunchtime. Here comes the hunger wave. And what's going to happen is you see the hunger start to go up, and you're like, oh, I'm pretty hungry. You try to distract yourself. And then it's like, oh, I'm getting hungrier. It's like, is this ever going to stop? Am I ever going to stop being hungry? And
Yeah.
you stop being hungry, and the wave crashes, and you're like, oh, I'm not hungry anymore. It was just
Yep.
your body's asking for food. And so when you have your continuous glucose monitor on, you see your numbers are not going low, you're not symptomatic anymore with the hunger, because that's something else we need to talk about.
Yeah.
But you're just feeling this, like, my stomach feels hungry. That's something we can push through to start to re-regulate. Like, we don't have to eat 6 meals a day anymore, right? So that's huge. So what I wanted to say about, like, the other piece of this is, like, my client was having issues when she was dropping low, but it was never going below 160, which is not low. Like,
Yeah.
if it were going to 60 and she were feeling like that, that would be what we call maybe like a true low.
Yeah.
But oftentimes what I see is that the intense change, so I'm making these like up and down movements with my hands. If you're not seeing me, if you're just hearing me, what I'm trying to say with this movement is that the body does not like sharp changes. It doesn't like really fast changes. Remember, it's always trying to seek homeostasis. We learn this in like 7th grade biology. It always wants to stay the same. So if we have this giant spike because we drank a Gatorade, or like, had a Frappuccino, that's going to give us a really sharp rise in our blood sugar. And that's going to be a really quick change. And the body's going to freak out and try to correct that right away. But it's going to change it in the direct opposite direction. And then it's going to go really low. So then you just had this really intense high, really quick low. And that change is going to feel really bad in the body. And so we can start to develop symptoms. And like I said, from this lack of the metabolic flexibility, we're getting symptoms when we're not even in a low range. And this is where you get so much gaslighting from doctors, because they'll say your blood sugar is 120, you're fine. If anything, it's too high. Why are you feeling like you have low blood sugar? Why do you feel like you need to call an ambulance? Why do you feel like you're having a panic attack? It's because of the lack of that flexibility of the metabolism to like, it really is like the gas light came on in the car. It feels like there's no energy. So that is what is happening. And so if that's the case, if you're looking at a continuous glucose monitor, don't put your low range at 70. If you feel terrible at 120, put your low range at like 125, and work to stop spiking the blood sugar, because that is where we're going to see big changes happening. If we're not spiking it, it's not going to come down as low. We're not putting as much sugar into the system. We don't need as much insulin. And the insulin can start ticking down. We get less inflammation. We're healing our adrenals. We're adding in nutrient dense foods and lots of minerals, and we're getting the rest we need. We're getting the sunlight. We're starting to, if we can, get some movement. Some people like this cannot move. They will drop immediately if they start to do any sort of exercise or any stressor or go in the heat or take a shower. It's really severe for a lot of people. But if we're stopping those spikes and we can flatten those blood sugar spikes, then you'll start to see you can slowly but surely feel better at these lower numbers. And
Right.
that's really how we want that treatment to sort of progress, for helping you to tolerate feeling okay in those lower numbers, because we don't want an A1C that's high, and we don't want our average blood sugar to be higher because that's where we feel okay. It still means that we need to do more work.
Yeah.
So the goal is to feel good in the range, I would say, of like 70 to 110 would be like where I would put my green range on a CGM, or maybe 120, depending on, honestly, the season. So like if I'm really active, if it's summer, like maybe I'll put it to 120. If I'm trying to do more ketosis, maybe in the winter when it's like I'm not using up as much fuel, or it's not really biologically appropriate for me to have all these carbohydrates right now, then I might tighten it to like 110. And so keep it a little bit tighter, and hanging out in there is really what we're wanting.
I love that. That was really great. And I think that that does a really good job explaining how some people get missed. I mean, completely missed. And I know you see this too. Like I'll have people that are having full on anxiety, panic attacks, and they are just getting completely written off from their physicians. And you just take 1 second, look at a CGM, and you're like, oh my goodness, it's your blood sugar. Like it has nothing to do with all this other stuff. So do you find there are certain things that this may like be perceived as from a conventional medicine standpoint, or is there anything that you notice that, or I know we've talked about the mental health stuff, but why is this so frequently missed?
Yeah, I would say that, well, doctors have a very specific view of what hypoglycemia is. They say if you're not dropping below 50, you're not hypoglycemic. And so there's that, because I
Yeah.
was 60 and I almost passed out. And
Yeah.
that's still pretty low. But some people are feeling bad when their blood sugar is 100. So that is also hugely getting missed.
Mm.
And I think doctors are looking at an A1C and maybe a fasting glucose, which could be okay if you're, somewhat hypoglycemic, but let's say your fasting glucose is like 75. You feel like you're going to pass out. Your A1C is a beautiful 4.9. It's fantastic because your blood sugar is always freaking low, or it's like going high and then really low. So you have this beautiful average, and your doctor's like, you don't have any blood sugar problems. Are you kidding me? You're like the picture of health over here. But they're just ignoring the fact that A1C is not ruling out insulin resistance or hypoglycemia. It can't rule it out. It can rule out type 2 diabetes. It can rule out maybe prediabetes, but it cannot rule out these other things.
Right.
And so they'll look at these numbers and just dismiss you, because there's also, and this is where, call me a conspiracy theorist, but you do the math. There's no drug that can help low blood sugar
No.
besides glucose tablets, which make
Yeah.
the problem worse, which are needed for people who have type 1 diabetes. And, maybe in an emergency, if you're not working with anyone to help you with your hypoglycemia, that may be what you need. But like in an emergency, but we want to try to avoid those emergencies. We don't ever want to get to the point where we're needing glucose tablets. And there are different causes for especially reactive hypoglycemia that we can go into. But I think that doctors are just really not, their education has not caught up to
Right.
what's really happening. And so many people present with so much anxiety and panic that they're like, I feel so anxious. I feel so anxious. And so the doctors are just saying, okay, go on anxiety medications.
Yeah.
And so I have so many clients that say, I have been prescribed every anxiety medication ever invented, and I got to come off all of them in your program. Like,
Yeah.
I had a client who was on 5 bipolar medications for over a decade. Turns out she didn't have bipolar, she just had hypoglycemia. And so, like, if you look at the work of Chris Palmer, he's out there
And
saying metabolic health is mental health. Mental health is metabolic health. And so we have to start looking at those things as one and the same. And that if you go back to looking at what are the earliest signs of low blood sugar, so many of them have to do with our brain and our mental health. Like, we're not patient. We're not paying attention. We're really tired. We're anxious. We're irritable. So these are all things that have to do with the brain. And so, of course, it's looking like something else. It's like, oh, maybe you have low thyroid or something like that. Maybe you do have low thyroid, but you also have blood sugar issues. And if a doctor would just put a CGM on somebody, they would see, oh, this is a problem. But I don't think doctors know how to help, because we were also talking offline, like, what did you learn
yeah.
you should do for reactive hypoglycemia?
Totally. Well, when I was being trained as a conventional medicine dietitian, and this was years ago, it essentially what I was taught would, looking at what we know now, just lead to insulin resistance. So what I was trained is, give them snacks, teach them to eat multiple meals a day, teach them to eat higher carbohydrate, et cetera, so on and so forth. And like, knowing how we know, especially with the advent of wearables and CGMs, like, we just have so much more data now that we just know that that's just a terrible idea, because it just feeds your quote unquote sugar dragon. And so now, knowing what I know now, that just isn't the way to do it. We know we need those proteins, we know we need those fats. And so as a dietitian, knowing better now, I would never go back to what I was trained as a conventional dietitian. But you're right, I just think that the knowledge hasn't caught up with a lot yet. And then also, just I think a lot of times it just isn't easily recognized because of the labs we're pulling. Like you said, A1C doesn't
Mhm.
show it, fasting insulin wouldn't even show it in a lot of cases. And so um in the earlier cases. So I think it's just being able to recognize it, and also getting the word out to the consumers of like, oh man, I have every symptom she just described. And then, reaching out
Yeah.
to you, Dani, and so you can provide help. So I think that's really, really good. And so what give us some like action steps for anyone listening that's like, oh man, she's literally describing me in a nutshell. What would you say are kind of like some pivotal points that they could take some movement on?
For sure. So you already were speaking about it, and I think this is missed in the conversation because, like you said, you were told to like have them have snacks, and like the main piece of advice that someone is going to get, especially if they have reactive hypoglycemia from a doctor, is to have lean protein and complex carbohydrates every 2 to 3 hours.
Yep.
And lean protein is going to spike your blood sugar, actually, because of and especially for these people who are really, their body is looking so hard for sugar. So any of that extra protein is going to get converted to sugar. And then you have complex carbohydrates. I'm sorry, brown rice does not slow the absorption
No,
of the rice
no,
that much.
no.
So you're getting a big blood sugar spike and then a crash again. So like, what people have told me is that diet makes them worse. And it's obvious to when you know the science why it does make them worse.
Yep.
But people don't know this. They're like, okay, cool. Like, and it is better for some people because they didn't even know to put protein. They're like, I see people in these Facebook groups and they just don't know. This is not like, how could you not know? We don't know. We're not born with a manual, right? So people are like, oh, I ate a baked potato. Like, my blood sugar crashed so high. It's because people are not aware of what macronutrients are in foods, which is really important place to start learning, like, what are the macro breakdowns of the foods that you're eating.
Yeah.
And then knowing we need to have fat is your blood sugar's best friend. We need a lot of dietary fat. And with my people with reactive hypoglycemia who are super sensitive or who have these tendencies to have low blood sugar, the difference between having meat that already has fat in it and that doesn't is a huge game changer. And having the carnitine content that comes from red meat and pork and lamb is really, really powerful for a lot of these people because the carnitine can help you burn fat a little bit better.
Yes.
And so a lot of people will even supplement with carnitine, and they're like, there's such a huge difference. If I have salmon with like an avocado and like a cream sauce for dinner, all this fat, if I have that for dinner, I'm crashing overnight. If I have beef, I'm not crashing overnight. So there's a really big difference. So feel this in your body. And like I'm telling you, beef heals. It is the most powerful tool for hypoglycemia for sure. So getting lots of fats on your plate is really, really important. And then of course we need to be able to digest these fats, which is a whole other podcast episode. I have a whole course on that, but we need to be able to digest these fats. So if you don't have a gallbladder, you have a higher chance of being one of these people we're talking about. And so it doesn't mean that you can't have fat. It's that you need something to help you digest all this fat that you're eating so you can use the fats to help stabilize your blood sugar, to go longer between meals, to absorb your fat soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, which are so, so important for our blood sugar regulation. So we need to eat the fats. We need to be able to digest and absorb the fats. And we also really need to support our adrenals. We need minerals. We need minerals. Bone broths, really good mineral supplements like Quinton, hypertonic minerals.
Yep.
We need to be adding electrolytes to our water. We need to be having lots of salt. Do not fear salt. Some people are like, oh my God, I had salt and it was game changing. Put good salt in your water, like a Redmond's real salt, a Himalayan salt, make Soleil water, add extra salt to your food. Potassium is another really important mineral that we need. We need magnesium. So going through all the electrolytes, we need all of those. And we need to really, really look for mineral rich foods. Seaweeds are really rich in minerals, bone broths and meat stocks and grass-fed meats and eggs. So like now we're looking at, we have to eat real whole foods instead of these packaged foods, which are just really devoid of nutrients and minerals in general. We need to, if you haven't already stopped coffee, most of y'all have because you have, you're crashing all day, but some of you haven't. But getting rid of caffeine because it's really draining the adrenals when we need those adrenals to be able to put our blood sugar back up to that normal range. So I really love Rasa coffee alternative. It's like an adaptogenic herbs that can help you to actually strengthen your adrenals instead of draining from them. So it gives you this like nice, gentle boost of energy. It's almost like a clarity. I wouldn't even say it's a boost because some people are like, oh my God, I can't do anything for my adrenals because I feel too like buzzy. Like it puts me too high. So if that's the case, maybe you already have high cortisol. So we may need something to help you calm down. So then we're coming into like breath work. We're looking at circadian rhythm, getting outside in the morning, putting your feet on the bare earth, like getting like my computer screen right now is dark red. Like I have iris software because if I stare at this screen, it kills my eyes. So I use blue blocking glasses, opening the windows during the day, getting outside. We want bright days, dark nights, turning down the lights at night. This is really like, you're like, okay, turning off the lights at night is going to help my blood sugar. Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It will absolutely help your blood sugar because blue light tells our body that it's like noon. And so what are we doing at noon? We need cortisol. We need cortisol at noon. We need certain things in our body, certain hormonal cascades to happen at noon. So if it's 9 or 10 p.m. and we just ate and our body's like, oh, she's eating. So it must be like earlier in the day. And then this light is on. So it's like, what is it? Like 2 p.m.? You're not going to be able to sleep very well because your body thinks it's 2 p.m. And so you're not getting the right hormones and the right genes switched on and off at the right times. And so many of our health issues are an issue of this timing. So you're going to start to see a lot of information coming out there about circadian health, about blue blockers, and about like getting outside and seeing the sunrise. Like, this is not a fad. This is not going to go away. This is like, oh my gosh, we've been in houses, are these artificial environments for so long, and we are suffering because of it. So getting outside as much as you can is going to be really helpful. And then just there's another kind of caveat that I just wanted to speak to real quickly. And this is for the people who have reactive hypoglycemia. There's a lot of causes other than just insulin resistance or high insulin. And one thing that I was starting to see was that some of the people that I was treating who had reactive hypoglycemia, their insulin was actually low. It was actually really good. And they would start eating a meal, and in the middle of the meal, they would start crashing. Like, immediately. They couldn't even eat their carbs last, which is what I recommend for most people, because their blood sugar would start crashing the second they started eating. And so a lot of these people have a hypersensitivity to insulin. And so it's too much GLP-1, which is like Ozempic, you know, like what's helpful for a lot of people. So they're having the reverse of this. And so a lot of times this is due to things like an increase in lipopolysaccharide, which are these nasty inflammatory substances a lot of like gut bugs give off. So if this is you, we really need to look at, why are you having this increase in inflammation? Is it a hidden infection, root canal, overgrowth in your intestines? Is it mold in your environment? That's a really, really common one, is that people have mold. They don't know it. And oftentimes with the mold, you get a lot of panic, a lot of anxiety and panic. So if you're like, my blood sugar is dropping all the time, it's dropping no matter what I eat, I have to eat every few hours, and I'm super anxious and panicky, like, and you think back, like, my symptoms got worse when I moved in here, or my symptoms got worse after we had this flood or this leak or something. You also just might not even know. Homes just have mold, even if they're brand spanking new. Yep. So this is the hard part. This is where it's like, I can't help you anymore, because this is where you have to look in your environment. What is making you sick? Do you need some sort of gut testing? Mm-hmm. And then there's also like interleukin 6, which is like another thing that I honestly don't even understand, but it's like these, just some of these inflammatory compounds can make us really susceptible to having like this hypersensitivity to insulin. There's also some other hidden causes of reactive hypoglycemia. Number one would be an insulinoma. So you may have a tumor on your pancreas. I caught someone who had that one time. She followed everything I said to a T, and it was something about her afternoon meal. Whatever she did, it, like, no matter what she ate, what she ate for breakfast worked, and it was perfect. And then she had that. I'm like, just try having that same exact meal. Didn't work. I'm like, go rule out an insulinoma. She had the insulinoma, got it like laparoscopically removed. No more insulin resistance, no more reactive hypoglycemia. She lost all this weight and she's healthy and happy, like the end. Amazing. So sometimes having an insulinoma is like the easiest way to fix it. But so like, don't freak out if you have that, or you're like, oh my God, I have this. And then there's some other things, H. pylori. So having these issues and also like really fast gastric emptying. So I see, unfortunately, a lot of people get this after gastric bypass. So if that's you, you have to don't drink anything around your meals, have extra fiber with your meals to try to slow the absorption. And I also I'm wondering if something like a GLP-1 type agonist potentially would slow the absorption. I would slow the gastric emptying. Yeah. So potentially talking to a specialist about that. I'm not recommending it. I'm saying have a conversation, because it could be something that may be supportive in that case, because it could slow the gastric emptying. It's like, what else does that? Nothing really. Like, sometimes apple cider vinegar can do it and things like that. But so those kind of things. there's certain nutrient deficiencies that can drive it. Magnesium, biotin, chromium, I said magnesium, and carnitine could
Yeah.
be some. So, I mean, these are all things that can really, really impact our ability to keep our blood sugar stabilized. So yeah, it's a whole
Thing.
world out there. And I've had to learn so much. But I love helping people with this issue because it's really exciting to see people saying, "Oh my God, I went longer than 90 minutes today without eating. Like I could be alone with my kids now, and not feel like I'm going to pass out. I've had people, they started driving again. They can
Wow.
hold a job again. So there's a lot of people who are in this literal blood sugar prison of having to eat every couple of hours, and or they feel like they're going to pass out and they still feel terrible, or they have no window between when the symptoms come on and when they have to eat. Like it's just like immediate, like panic. So they start to get longer and longer windows, like, oh, I started to feel a mild symptom and I didn't eat for like 15 minutes and I was okay. So you get to see these glimmers of like these improvements, and then before you know it, they're like, I'm going longer without eating. I wasn't hungry for dinner. Like, who am I? And so it's really cool to see. And working them onto a diet where they're burning more fat for fuel, working them there really slowly over time is a really powerful tool in the healing process as well. And it's not an end point, but it is a piece that is really supportive as well.
I love it. I love it. Well, tell everybody where they can find you. You have an incredible podcast that I don't miss. Give us all the info on where to reach out. I know there's people listening that are going to be like, I've got to talk to Dani. So give us all the scoop on how to contact you.
Yeah, sure. So I hang out a lot on Instagram. Danielle Hamilton Health is my handle. My podcast is Unlock the Sugar Shackles. I have a group coaching program, Blood Sugar Mastery, that is appropriate for people who are having these lows, having highs and lows, type 2 diabetes. It's really anyone on the blood sugar spectrum, because like we saw with that photo that I showed of my client, she thought she had reactive hypoglycemia, but meanwhile she was type 2 diabetic, but still experiencing hypoglycemic symptoms. So it's like, I can't really exclude anyone on this spectrum because someone could be bridging all parts of it. And so that's amazing. I love working with people in my program. It's 8 weeks long. I run it multiple times a year. We're having a new round, September 17th. It starts 2023. But I'm definitely going to be doing it again. And then I do have that digestion course as well, that will be coming out later in the fall. Optimize your digestion for low carb diets. So if you're, you listen to Temple and you're doing keto, or maybe you're not even a low blood sugar person, but you're like, I don't really digest fat very well.
Totally.
That's a good place for that. And then I am going to be having just a hypoglycemia program. It will be included in Blood Sugar Mastery, but just if that's just like your one issue, to make it a little bit lower cost for people so they can get the help that they need. That's coming down the pipeline as well.
Awesome, Dani. Well, thank you for jumping on. It's an honor to be your friend. It's just such a pleasure to hear you talk. I learned so much from you. It's just been great. And I know the following is going to love this podcast. So thank you again. And I would encourage everyone listening, please go follow her, subscribe to all the things, go listen to her podcast. You really are missing out if you're not already. So thank you again, Dani, for coming on.
Thanks, Temple. It's so much fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you so much for listening. As just a reminder, you can find all of the information we chatted about in the show notes. So go there now. And if you love this episode, please consider subscribing to my channel, liking, sharing, do whatever you can to get the word out. I appreciate you being here. It means the world.